Right now, on a hot day, you can press a button and cold air will pour out of the wall. You can stand in a desert in the middle of summer and make the room around you cooler than a spring morning. You do it without thinking, and you should think about it, because you are performing something that no human being in all of history, no pharaoh, no emperor, no Roman general, no Persian king, was ever able to do. They could command armies, they could build pyramids, and not one of them could make cold. This is the strange thing that separates cooling from heating, and it goes all the way down to physics. To make heat is easy. You burn something. Humans have been able to conjure warmth from a stick and a spark for 1,000,000 years, and every ruler in history could be as warm as they wished. But cold is different, in a way that is genuinely profound. There is no such thing as making cold. Cold is not a substance. It is not a thing you can produce. Cold is simply the absence of heat, and there is no anti-fire, nothing you can burn to create it. To cool something, you cannot add cold to it, because cold does not exist to be added. You can only do one thing: physically pull the heat out of it and carry that heat somewhere else. And for almost the entire history of the human species, nobody could do that. So cold could not be manufactured. It could only be found in the few places nature had already made it, and then stolen, hoarded, and desperately preserved. The entire history of cooling, right up until about 150 years ago, is the story of humans as thieves and hoarders of cold, hunting it, capturing it, and guarding it like treasure because it was the one comfort they could never simply make. The oldest method was the most obvious. If the cold only comes in winter, steal it then and hide it for summer. As early as 3,000 years ago, civilizations from ancient China to Greece to Rome were harvesting ice. In the depth of winter, workers cut blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers, hauled them into deep pits and underground chambers, packed them in straw and sawdust for insulation, and sealed them away. And there, buried in the earth, insulated from the summer sun, a good portion of that winter ice would survive for months, so that a Roman aristocrat could have a chilled drink in the heat of August, cooled by ice that had frozen half a year earlier. It sounds almost mundane until you realize what it actually was. A way of reaching into winter, grabbing a piece of it, and carrying it forward through time into the summer. Storing cold like grain, but the true masterpiece of stealing cold came from the one place you would least expect it, the desert, where it does not freeze at all. In the arid heart of ancient Persia, more than 2,000 years ago, engineers built structures called yakhchāls. The word means ice pit, and what they did inside them should be impossible. They made ice in a desert, in a climate where the daytime air never drops anywhere near freezing. They did it by exploiting a piece of physics so subtle that most people today have never heard of it. On a clear, dry night, a surface exposed to the open sky radiates its heat upward, out into the cold of space, and can chill itself to well below the temperature of the surrounding air. The night sky can effectively be many degrees colder than the ground beneath it. The Persians built shallow pools, flooded them at night with water carried through underground channels called qanats, and let those pools radiate their heat into the desert sky. By morning, even when the air had never come close to freezing, a thin sheet of ice would form across the surface. And then, the race began. As dawn broke and the sun threatened to reclaim its prize, teams of workers rushed to break up the fragile ice and haul it into the yakhchāl, a massive conical dome of mud brick, its walls up to 6 feet thick, insulated with a special mortar and shaded by towering walls that could reach 40 feet, throwing the structure into cold shadow. Night after night through the winter, they harvested the thin ice their pools had coaxed from the sky and stored it deep in the pit where it would last through the blazing summer. Desert people, in one of the hottest landscapes on Earth, made and hoarded ice using nothing but water, earth, shade, and the cold of the night sky. With it, they chilled drinks and made falude, a frozen dessert people in Iran still eat today. They had stolen cold from the desert itself. Persia solved the other half of the problem too, not just making cold, but moving cool air through a home. They built windcatchers, called badgirs, tall towers rising above the rooftops, open at the top to catch whatever breeze was moving, and shaped to funnel that air down into the living spaces below. Often, the incoming air was drawn across the cool water of an underground qanat on its way in. so that what arrived in the room was not just moving air, but chilled, moistened air. A tower that air-conditioned a house with no electricity, no moving parts, no fuel, just the wind and the clever shape of the building, working for thousands of years. For those who couldn't build a wind tower or a desert ice dome, there was the humblest and most widespread trick of all. The only method that actually creates a whisper of cold anywhere, out of almost nothing: evaporation. When water evaporates, it carries heat away with it. The liquid steals warmth from whatever it touches in order to turn into vapor. Across ancient Egypt, India, and beyond, people exploited this with porous clay pots, the Egyptian zir, the Indian matka, vessels of unglazed earthenware filled with water. The water slowly seeps through the clay and evaporates off the outer surface, and as it does, it pulls heat out of what remains, keeping the water inside startlingly cool even in brutal heat. Wet a cloth, hang it in a doorway, let the breeze pass through it, and the room beyond grows cooler. In 1758, Benjamin Franklin and a colleague demonstrated the raw power of this effect in a laboratory, chilling a thermometer well below freezing simply by evaporating volatile liquids off its bulb. It was the closest humans could come to making cold from nowhere. And it was still just borrowing a trick from physics, not manufacturing cold at will. Now for the part the comfortable version of this story leaves out. Before machines, cold was not just hard to get. It was paid for in human bodies. Harvesting winter ice was brutal, freezing, dangerous labor. Men and horses working on cracking ice, sometimes falling through it and drowning in the black water beneath. By the late 19th century, 5,000 men worked the ice harvest on a single American lake, and an entire global empire was built on this frozen labor. A Boston merchant named Frederick Tudor, mocked as a madman, began shipping New England pond ice around the world in 1806, eventually sailing 180 tons of it 16,000 miles to Calcutta, a 4-month voyage, arriving with 100 tons still unmelted. When that ice reached India, people had never seen the substance. One man who touched it reportedly believed it had burned him and wrapped his hand in his robe. In the heat of colonial India, the wealthy were cooled by another human cost entirely. The punkah walla, a servant who sat and pulled the cord of a great swinging ceiling fan hour after hour through the sweltering night so that his masters could sleep in a moving breeze. Before we could make cold, comfort in the heat was something one group of people extracted from the labor of another. And then, in the middle of the 19th century, a doctor in Florida tried to do the impossible thing, to actually make cold. His name was John Gorey, and he was not trying to get rich or cool a mansion. He was trying to save lives. Practicing in Apalachicola, Florida, he was convinced that the heat itself was killing his fever patients, and he began blowing air over ice to cool their sick rooms. But shipping ice down to Florida was ruinously expensive, so Gorey set out to build a machine that could produce ice on its own, using a compressor to do mechanically what nature did with the winter: pull heat out of water until it froze. In 1851, he was granted a patent for it, and the response tells you everything about how humans had understood cold for their entire history. A newspaper ridiculed him as a crank who thought he could make ice as good as God Almighty. The very idea that a mere man could manufacture cold, could create it on demand without winter or a mountain or the night sky, struck people as not just absurd, but almost blasphemous. Cold was something only nature and God could make. Gorey died broke and largely dismissed. But he had been right, and half a century later, the thing he'd reached for arrived almost by accident. In 1902, an engineer named Willis Carrier was handed a mundane industrial problem. Humidity was making the paper wrinkle at a Brooklyn printing company, ruining the ink. To solve it, Carrier built a machine that pushed air across coils chilled by a refrigeration cycle, and in doing so, he built the first modern air conditioner. He wasn't trying to make people comfortable. He was trying to keep paper flat. Human comfort was a side effect, and it would take another half-century to reshape the world. But the thing itself had finally been done. For the first time in the entire history of life on Earth, a creature could make cold, real, reliable, manufactured cold, anywhere, in any season, at will. And here's how that machine works, because it is the whole point. An air conditioner does not create cold because nothing can. What it does is exactly what humans had been failing to do for 100,000 years. It pulls the heat out of the air in your room and it pumps that heat somewhere else, outside, through the unit humming against the wall of the building. The cold inside is bought entirely by the heat dumped outside. You are not making your room colder so much as moving your room's warmth out into the world. Which brings us to the sting in the tail, the exact mirror of the trap our ancestors lived in. They faced a choice between the cold and the smoke. We solved the cold completely and created a new version of the same bargain. Because the heat an air conditioner removes does not vanish. It piles up outside, and in a dense city full of air conditioners, all pumping their heat into the same streets, that waste heat measurably warms the air of the city itself, especially at night, making the outside hotter for everyone, which makes everyone run their air conditioners harder. The refrigerant chemicals that first made this magic possible, the CFCs, tore a hole in the ozone layer before we banned them. The chemicals that replaced them turned out to be potent greenhouse gases, and the sheer soaring energy demand of a planet learning to cool itself is now one of the fastest growing pressures on the climate. A climate that is getting hotter, which makes us want more cooling, which produces more heat. We spent thousands of years unable to make cold, stealing scraps of it from winter lakes and desert skies and evaporating water. And then we finally learned the secret, which turned out to be no secret at all. You cannot make cold. You can only take heat and give it to someone else. We conquered the heat inside our own four walls by pushing it out into the shared air of the world. And now, to keep ourselves cold, we are quietly heating the very planet we are cooling ourselves against. You press a button, and cold pours out of the wall. The power no emperor in history could hold. And just outside, where you can't see it, the heat you banished is piling up in the air we all have to breathe.